Hello, everyone. So we will start with, I don't know if we will really enchant the word, but we will try, we'll do our best to give some extra food for thoughts on how we are thinking to start the change. What are our thoughts around it? And it has been many months of work. Yeah, it is coming. And that uh, we are putting around this main question on how to create the buildings we need for the planet we want. So it is really about rethinking. And to do that, we formed, should we say, a coalition between VELUX. We have Artelia. Rasmus Sogor is here with us and will also present later on. And then we have BPIE, Building Performance Institute Europe, where Zolt and Judith will also take the stage. And then No Objectives, where Kasper Bioskov will also talk later. Yeah, just to start off on why we are starting this sort of thinking and where are we coming from. This is gonna be ahead. Too much spoiler here. Yeah. Okay. So we start as with this sort of motto. We say, imagine if every new home left the world better than it found it. And how can we do that? How can we put that in practice? So first of all, why we are here. So we are looking at how can we shift the building industry from being a source of extraction towards a force for regeneration. And I know that's a big question. We come from a solid foundation because we already tried something to solve a big problem, big challenges that there are in the housing industry. We came up with innovative solution, and actually part of the team was also part of Living Places. And then we tried to share all the knowledge through all the measurable results that we had. And we believe it worked, it was a success. We proved that we can actually build with 3 times better indoor climate and 3 times lower CO2 emissions. And it was also actually verified as being the Denmark's lowest LCA of new build at that time, with 3.8 kilos of CO2 per square meter per year. And what we're trying to do now is actually to, if we look at the past, we try to improve the new build, trying to, of course, go much better than we did in the past. But in this next step, we are looking at how can we improve and find a smarter use of the building that we already have. How can we look at existing building and go beyond the harm reduction, but go towards regenerative practices? So how can we leave the world a better place? And this is what we're trying to do after Living Places, which was trying to cater for new build, bringing a solution, one solution for new build. We're now looking at renovation with reliving. And we don't want to stop at doing less harm, but we want to do better than that. We want to try to restore buildings, but also restore ecosystems around buildings. And our focus, of course, is on a smarter use of the existing building stock and also trying to look at buildings in a way that they, of course, reduce the pressure on the planet, but that they also provide affordable homes and also healthier homes for people. So by moving beyond harm reduction towards regenerative building practices, Reliving aims at transforming the building industry into a catalyst for net positive impact. So what to do? This is a big question, and I let it explain to the experts from BPIE.
Thank you very much, Ambra. Yes, that is the big question. And I will not be able to answer it right away, but what I want to do is to give a little bit of background. Oh no, a black background, obviously. No, yes, so we know that the problem is multifaceted. Okay. Yes, I think we should be. I think I pushed there. Ooh. I'm sorry for that. So what we're going to see in a second here is all the different facets of the problem. So we're starting with unhealthy buildings that can actually be harmful. And I know from the slide that is about 15% of the buildings in the EU that are having problems like damp walls and rot in the walls or in the ceilings. And what does that do? That is actually a problem and affecting 1 out of 3 children and leaving them in environments that can cause or can put higher risks for health, such as asthma problems, cardiovascular diseases problems. So, and the next step, we'll be looking at inefficient buildings and inequality. We know that 40% of the final energy demand in Europe is consumed in buildings, and that causes about 36% of the emissions. So that's a large part. And we also know that vulnerable groups are more affected by it because they cannot afford the nicer, better homes, and therefore they have higher energy bills sometimes. And we have seen also, we have data for that during the energy crisis, that in Eastern Europe, or actually everywhere, we can see that people were exchanging, so they were sacrificing comfort or a healthy environment due to the high prices. So that means that vulnerable groups are more affected by this problem. We know that we have a construction rate of about 1%. What we've also found in these latest projects is that these new constructions cause 15 to 21% of the emissions, total emissions of the building stock. So including embodied and operational emissions. The remaining 99% of the buildings emit 79% of the emissions. So we can see that there is a disproportion between new buildings and existing buildings. And given that renovation also has lower emissions, that's the reason why we're here and why we want to shift the focus. I was talking about the resource and waste intensiveness. Apart from 50% of all the materials being extracted by construction, construction also generates 38% of the waste. So this is really about the big picture and the different aspects, right? And finally, unaffordable and inaccessible. This is currently a very big problem. And that draws a lot of attention that between lately or between 2010 and 2024, house prices have increased by 54%, while rents climbed 26%. And we know that the income is not catching up with that, and that leads to an overburden rate of about 8.9% in 2023. Yes, at the same time, we know that more than 30% of the dwellings are under-occupied, while 16.8% are overcrowded. So we see there's something that can be maybe done there, and I'm going to that in a minute. But right now, this situation leaves about 1 million people homeless in the EU. So what's today's focus is, as I said, on the new build, is making this part, the new buildings, tweaking new buildings, and making them just a little bit more efficient. Well, they're already really good. And this is the visual representation of what I've explained before. The contribution of new buildings to CO2 emissions is here in this lighter orange. And then all this part is the existing buildings. So the idea is that right now we're focusing on this, and the question is, can we not focus on the rest, right? The future is already built. Now, these are a set of measures that I want to go through and really also a little bit look at how this addresses all the problems, or not all the problems, but multiple problems that I've presented before. So repurpose is the change of how we use the space, right? Offices to homes or any other changes. Reshape, making right sizing, right? Dividing, splitting, reconfiguring the space to make it fit for the use. Then reclaim. We have vacant buildings, we have underused buildings, and making the space useful and making it accessible to people. Refine. This is about the indoor comfort, about the temperature, about the indoor environment that here feels so nice. And finally, we have restoration, modernization, renovation. So everything that needs to be done in a building stock that is old. In Europe, we have a quite old building stock, and that is needed to make the buildings useful and adapt them to what the users need. Then finally, we have also some extensions. So we have first of all making. Well, that's not an extension, but it's a conversion to convert roofs into places that can be used. And then further on, we have the vertical extensions. So to build stories on top, and I've seen this personally also in Berlin, that it has been done and it can be done also on multi-family houses. And finally, the horizontal extension where you add on and you're making use of the wall that's already there. Yes, these are the measures, and they have not only the advantage that we're using what's there, but there's also something about the economics of it. Yes, so you're really using what is there, but you're also making renovations more cost efficient, for example, because afterwards there will be more people using it and more often, and that's how these measures are also more cost efficient and have a better payback. Thank you. So this is one way of how we address these potentials. And to go a little bit deeper into that, I will hand over to my colleague, Zsolt.
Thank you. Thank you, Edith. I'm so afraid of touching that, so Lorna, just stay there. All right, good. All right, can I have the next slide, please? Great. So we started off with surveying the challenge, the potential, and you saw that some of the numbers are really staggering. Some of these numbers are making me panic. But equally, when we looked at the potential that we can unlock, and Lorna has actually spoiled the whole discussion at the very beginning, saying that here the focus is very much on better using the existing building stock. And this is something that we try to look into, existing evidence base. We try to look through existing literature, research, and then also we will share some points from our own modeling. And essentially, as you see, the benefits and the potential that we can capture with focusing on what is existing, already built floor area are manifold. The emission savings, resource savings, these are probably the most obvious ones. And this is always in the front of our mind. Judith also mentioned that, yeah, there is an affordability issue also that we are facing. Essentially, we are talking about a double crisis of climate and housing. And none of these issues actually very specifically European. They are actually very, very global issues. And it's very much on the top of policymaking. If you look at just the recent elections across Europe, it was an issue which was featuring very, very high on the agenda. And actually, if you look at unlocking existing space, either through better using underoccupied spaces or just reintroducing buildings which have been left vacant in the existing building stock, it can be actually a cost-effective and, very importantly, also a time-effective solution to creating new homes or new housing units. So that is actually a bit where we try to refocus the public discourse, which very often from an industry perspective, they look at this issue almost exclusively through increasing the supply of homes, building quick, building very often low cost. So it's a way for us, it's an opportunity for us also to refocus and redefine this discussion. And the evidence base is there, basically. If we better using the existing building stock, we can cover already what is needed in terms of new housing units. Can I have the next slide? Right, but these are the other less obvious benefits and potentials that we wanted to put a highlight on. Economics, it's always one of the pressing issue that comes up, and it's always one of it's always being framed as one of the challenges. And this is something that we also wanted to turn around a bit and to look for evidence-based, but what is the investment opportunity, and not just for the private sector, but also first and foremost for the public sector, because if we are simply using better what is already there, we are better using already the infrastructure as well. So essentially there are saving potentials when it comes to developing less of new infrastructure. But there is also like huge investment opportunities when we look at a bit wider than the individual building stock, the individual building level, and we look more towards the stock and regeneration of projects. So when you look at also the way how the climate impacts are being distributed across the world, because there was one aspect related to global justice. And when we look at this, we are here in Europe, and we have this tendency of very much focusing inwards and using Europe as a sort of front runner in addressing many of these issues. But we always, or very often at least, we tend to forget that inequality in terms of income has also a direct impact on the responsibility that we have for our own individual carbon footprint. And that's something, a very important aspect. If we want to address this in a way that is globally fair, then focusing on the existing space is clearly the better option, because simply we take less of the virgin materials, we take less of the natural resources, which very often come from very long supply chains and very often come from outside of Europe. And then this is also one of my favorite topics, is the social acceptance, because we very often get this question, especially from policymakers, to say, well, look, we can't be too ambitious in terms of building policy simply because the public is not ready. And we looked at the studies to what extent there is public acceptance and there is social acceptance to downsizing, to sharing spaces, and I will exemplify this. And essentially, or going simply further with building regulations. And there is actually an overwhelming evidence whereby the public is actually willing to accept more than very often what policymakers or the industry assumes. Right, next slide. Yeah, so I was saying that, yeah, that one of the topics, at least in Brussels, is very much the affordability. And in connection with housing crisis, in connection with the climate crisis. So for us, at least, I think this is the perfect opportunity to define affordability, not exclusively in terms of costs, but very much focus also on the quality. And by here, I mean decency, health, efficiency, durability, but also the whole issues related to accessibility and inclusivity. Because if you look at basically the interventions that you require to better use the existing space, you can rely on existing infrastructure, which is social, economic infrastructure, also in terms of like jobs, availability, connection, amenities, which are available, is much more favorable to fill in these needs compared to like new developments. Next slide. Okay, so this is also, when we look at this, whose responsibility is to act is one thing is very clear. This is nobody alone in this. We all share to a certain extent a responsibility, and it's not about imposing certain limits to how we live or how we consume, or things that we know that are politically sensitive. It's more like enabling those who want to go one step further, at least at this point in time, to remove the barriers from doing that. So Okay, and just to give a bit of illustration of this is not just theoretical conversation that we are doing, because there are existing very good practices already across Europe. And here we just try to select a sample from the various measures, how they work across Europe. And we have done this through a study. So what we looked at is basically different mechanisms to better use existing space, either by simply like sharing homes. For instance, the first one in Belgium is about old people sharing homes with students, which is a very effective way of not just creating new housing units, but it's also a way of intergenerational exchange. Then we looked at various incentives that try to unlock the vacant space, to map them, and bring them back to the market. There's, again, a huge potential in this. Then we looked at consultancy services, technical advisory services, basically for people who want to optimize their buildings for different uses, making them more adaptable for future use. And then finally also at some conversion units. Next slide. So this is the sort of modeling we have done. And here are the estimated potential. So you see, we looked at basically avoided carbon emissions, but we also looked at avoided new construction. And basically, when you add these up together in the next slide, you see that it confirms very much the literature that we have reviewed, that basically you can avoid 120%. So it's even more than the new construction in a year in these countries. And then maybe I will leave you just with one message. Our entry point to this conversation was very much focusing on avoided emissions, avoided especially embodied carbon emissions that happens with new constructions, but there are various other entry points. And this is something that for those stakeholders who want to act on this, it's very important to make the business case. So it's not just about carbon emission savings. It's very important to say also that the initiatives which we have reviewed, they have not been started up, they have not been initiated because of climate reasons. Simply, very often for public authorities, it made economic sense. So that was, in a way, interestingly, the starting point. It wasn't necessarily because they cared so much about the climate. So you can actually do well by doing good. And yeah, I just finish off on this slide and then hand over to Kasper.
And I think this slide says it all. The future is already built, and it's actually quite beautiful, so we should try to preserve it. If you take the next slide, Lona. So how do we do this? How can we measure, benchmark, and design buildings that serve people and planet? That's sort of the trick, because we need to externalize all of these things into our planning if we want to do it. And what has happened is that we treat Earth system science, which is defining absolute environmental limits that keep our planet safe. And building biology, and we've sort of, that's defining the absolute conditions for people need to thrive in buildings. And we have quite good understanding in architecture about this. Of course, it's already under development all the time, but we know more or less the absolute limits. But in Earth system science, how we work with it in the architecture industry is that we have relative targets all the time. It's always about being a little bit, emitting a little bit less CO2. And we're really not taking the full Earth system science approach. So that's what we're going to try to do, if you take this one. Because we need to understand that the people and planet are interconnected. We are a subset system of a thriving planet. And if it doesn't thrive, we will actually not thrive. And that's why we need a full systems approach, where we go through all of these layers when we construct buildings. But we actually have a really good understanding in terms of the science now about how we benchmark against these absolute limits for climate science. And this is the planetary boundaries, which is 9 boundaries that are governing the Earth systems. And basically, we've transgressed approximately 6, but actually 7, but it's not in peer review yet. But basically, we have transgressed these. And that's a huge issue because it also tells us why net zero is not good enough. Because even if we just stop adding more harm to this, we are still in overshoot. And if you take the next, it's an animation. And the best way to explain this is that if you have a really high blood pressure, just not accelerating further doesn't make you healthy. And that's the thing we have to understand, that it's not enough just to stop harm. We have to actively regenerate to get back within these boundaries. So we have to get our blood pressure in order to actually to have a thriving ecosystem. And that's what we need buildings to help us do. And that's why this is humanity's greatest challenge yet, to return back within the safe and just planetary boundaries. And this is what we're trying to say. Is that possible to do this intervention through building projects? But the problem is, how do we benchmark? Because it's very costly and it's almost impossible to have the data for all of these 9 boundaries. But coincidentally, we did a project in my old workplace with the Stockholm Resiliency Center, where we looked at this in a book called Donut for Urban Development, along with other great experts. And they said, we don't actually need to understand all of the boundaries. We just have 2 core boundaries. One is climate stability, measured in CO2. The other one is functioning ecosystem, measured in biodiversity loss. If we get these rights, the rest will more or less follow suit. And the good thing is that in the industry, we have the tools today to actually do this. So we have the life cycle assessment that we can use sort of that data to do the carbon footprints, which we know from living places and what we are working with today. But we also now have a new model called Impact World Plus, where we can assess from the same amount of quantitative material what the biodiversity loss is for a building. And it's really important to remember, when I talk biodiversity loss, I don't talk biodiversity loss on a site, because 90% of the biodiversity loss is happening in the value chain. It's out. And that's really important, because when we take out materials to build a home, we actually destroy nature. So just, of course, it's nice that we plant very beautiful landscapes around our buildings, but it's actually not where we need to focus. We need to focus on the off-site biodiversity part, because this is where it actually matters. And if this comes up, I will show you sort of a glimpse. I mean, maybe most of you already know this since you're experts in LCA. We have sort of the entire value chain, from extraction to production to construction and transport and use, and then at the end we get our CO2 equivalent measurable target. And with biodiversity loss, it's actually a little bit the same. We take how much material, what kind of materials we're using, we run them through a database that has quantified the biodiversity loss in all of this, and then we get a incredibly weird number that no one understands, which is potential fraction species lost, that no one understands, but that we can then translate into area. And that means that when we build a building like this, we know that we've approximately destroyed 11 hectares of biodiversity. So we now have the possibility to take that externality that's outside of the economy and then add it into the industry, which is a kind of a big deal, because it means that for the first time we can actually see what our impact is on those 2 core boundaries that we need to restore. And if we get that, then Rasmus will take over and explain how we turned that into a sort of a model approach for how we can do this.
Yes, I can just start the brief. I can just start. What we want is to make a holistic model that so we have indicators for both people and planet, and we have made a framework based on a model called the Butterfly framework from a project here in Denmark called Reduction Roadmap, and it is a way to address the core system boundaries, climate stability, and functioning ecosystems. And what we want is to make a tool that can operationalize the way of working with these core system boundaries. We know we have to reduce emissions and enhance biodiversity, so we need to cut emissions from the current level of CO2 emissions today to what we call the safe operating space for buildings. And that's something we have calculated in another project, but we know in a European level we need to cut emissions 96% to stop from doing more harm to the planet. That we can scale to the European building industry, to Denmark, to Germany, and maybe we will also get the illustrations in a second. This illustrates the current emissions from the European building industry, and we need to cut it by 96%. But how fast should we do that? Here we have used the budget, the CO2 budget within the Paris Agreement, the 1.5 degree goal. And for this model, we have used 3 different types of budgets because we need to put this into our holistic model where we can actually have a score for the CO2 emissions. So we have used the remaining budget for a likelihood of 50% chance of being within 1.5 degree temperature increase, 33 and 17%. And this will give us a this will give us a timeline for when to reach the safe operating space. So we have between 6 and 15 years to reach this safe operating space and reduce our emissions by 96%. At the same time, we need to address our biodiversity loss from the building industry. Today, we are not taking any responsibility. So with time, we need to take 100% responsibility for our biodiversity loss. So for the CO2 emissions, we can create a pathway, 3 different pathways for how to actually restore and regenerate nature based on our impact from our building industry. That's the action side of this butterfly. So on the impact side, we have, like Kasper said, when we calculate the biodiversity loss with a potentially disappeared fraction of species, we can convert that to an area. So we need to restore a certain amount of nature to actually regenerate this building. That nature also has a huge impact on the CO2 sequestration from the planet. So we know that, for example, if we, like Kasper said, we have to restore 11 hectares of nature, then that nature will also sequester carbon for a long time. So all in all, this is the action and impact of the butterfly. And thing about this model is that it can be scaled to any specific context. So right now it was developed for European building industry, but we can also scale it to the Danish building industry, for example. And because we have a higher emission per capita in Denmark, the model shrinks. We need to, in Denmark, cut emissions more than on a European level and also do it faster. So that forms the model for the Danish industry. And we can then apply it to a project. This is very small now, but here we applied it to offices in Denmark, and we can see that today offices will emit 7.5 kilo CO2 per square meter per year over a 50-year period, and then we need to reduce that emission by 97%. And with the 3 different budgets, we can also score this impact for the next years. So what we can see with this building is that we need to restore 11 hectares of nature. We can calculate the CO2 uptake from nature, and then we can place it in a model where we also look at the people part. Because people and planet are interconnected, and with this model, the People and Planet model, it combines Earth system limits and human health boundaries to provide a framework for creating the building we want, we need for the planet we want. Together with CO2 emissions, biodiversity loss, we also have the energy consumed in our buildings, because that's the foundation for all activities in society. along that, we have the people indicators. We need to have a purpose with our buildings, so we address that by looking into daylight, thermal comfort, indoor air quality, and acoustics. All these indicators form the people and planet model in this illustration here, and we can get different scores depending on how well the building is performing. And we did that with the LKR Innovation House, calculated the CO2 emissions, the biodiversity loss, how much we need to restore and protect of nature, and also looked at the thermal comfort here, the acoustics, the daylight, and all in all, we have the results of the building we are in now here. And this is a way of addressing these indicators, and during our design process, we can see different design solutions. How will that end up in this framework? So we always know that we are addressing climate stability, functioning ecosystems, and also we are building, constructing for building for people. Yes. So how do we enable this transition? Kasper will take it from here.
How do we get this transition going? And I think one of the big issues we've had when we try to solve this thing is that we always either take a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach. So either it's the industry that tries to innovate itself out of the problem, or it's like legislations that are getting forced on us. But what we're trying to do here is, with the pyramid, is to say, where do we need to focus our attention? Where is the biggest impact? And at the same time, the model that Rasmus just described tells us how to do it. So what we want to do is combine that top-down, bottom-up approach, where the industry can actually work and benchmark against these limits, and the politicians or the bigger strategic holistic framework can say, where do we need to intervene in the system? And that's what we're going to combine now for the next stage, where we'll take that approach by using the pyramid, figuring out what is the best leverage point in the system. We're going to use the people and planet model to then ensure that the projects that are being done is actually going to delivering on this promise, and then we'll do a prototype like we did with Living Places to show that this can actually be done. That's what we're hoping, at least.
Thank you very much to Judith and Salt and Rasmus, Ambra and Kasper. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. Maybe if I can invite you up here, because it's entirely your work. You have been grinding these data for a long time, and I would like to ask you at least a question. So, because I think you're not completely done. You have more. There's always more, right? There's always more knowledge that you can explore. But what will be the next? What are the next step?
You start,
Judith.
What will be the next step? I think what we need to look into a little bit deeper is these solutions, and what are the specific effects of these solutions, and also where can they be applied, because we know the building stock is very inhomogenic. They're very individual and demands, and I think there is something to do in that area, but most of all also focusing on the solutions and their impact.
Yeah, and I think now we are sort of have the framework for how we will operate, try to find sort of the biggest impacts we can get, and the model for how sort of we can achieve that. Now it's about getting to the translation on how we actually translate it into principles we can design with, because now it has to grow from a theoretical framework into real life practice, and that's where it becomes tricky. That's where we have to use a lot of time and energy on ensuring that we can deliver on this. And then, of course, the hope is that we can show that a renovation of an existing building can be done, so we actually avoid emission, both from new build but also from the operational, and at the same time we make up for the biodiversity loss and enable that restoration to both reduce emission and restore the planet. So that's our aim, at least. That can. We don't know if it's possible, but let's hope.
Thank you. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I think from our side also it's quite interesting to look at how do you recover nature? How do you do that? What could be a good model for companies to do that? How could that work? And that's also an interesting next step.
Yes.
And it's maybe also really important to say that it's not a offset scheme, because you still have to follow the reductions required for the Paris Accord. So it's just making up for the biodiversity. It's not about compensating for emitting more. It's about following climate science and the CO2 and ensuring that we make up for the biodiversity loss there is when we actually try to adapt to this change.
Yeah, so it's not a Catholic model. Should there be somebody Catholic in the room? Sorry, if I don't want to offend anybody. We have a question from Flemming Wittmann.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for excellent presentations. I think this was very inspirational and completely spot on. So I have a question about how do we combine, at least where there's just tiny bit of political momentum currently in Europe, and that's between circular economy, resource efficiency, and then affordability. And I think at least in the past there was this false narrative that you got to choose between the one or the other. And again, all of us know that's not the case. But how do we then kind of combine forces between resource efficiency, affordability, and make that happen and convince maybe there might be a few politicians who still sit on the fence and have doubts about all of this. And we also have a social climate fund that come to fruition 1st of January. So, you know, what do we do next?
Can I take this?
Please,
Jano?
Scholz, please.
Great question. I think a lot of what we have presented here is already known. It's quite intuitive, right? It's really nothing like anything new that we presented here. I think this is I think what makes it so radical in a way. Like, I think what's needed also to like convince policymakers and also just to inform policy design and maybe better implementation and also better interconnection between the different policy objectives is that more granular data, is that more granular understanding of what the leverage points are. Because I think also the way how we presented this and also the policy objectives that you have mentioned allude to the fact that we are talking about system change. So understanding the cross impacts between, you know, the different leverage points that we have available if we push on circularity, if we push on, I don't know, whole life carbon requirements, if we push on housing affordability, what will be the cross impacts, and then how can we harness the limitations, and also understand where the sort of very often still they are like policy misalignments in the sense of, you know, policy objective works against each other, and understanding where these pressure points are. I think this is something that we will have to explore further on.
Thank you, Scholz, for a very elaborate answer. We have time for one more question to the mother of the materials pyramid, actually, that this is also building on, starting with the food pyramid onto the materials pyramid. So we were quite nervous to show you this, actually, I can reveal.
Well, thank you. Maybe I also have to stand up. Anne Baim from the Royal Danish Academy School of Architecture. I just have, coming from academia, I have a question about methodology. And first of all, thank you for impressive work. I'm very, very, very fascinated and excited about it. So, but when you showed the very final spiderweb diagram,
Yeah.
you probably remember it because it was like almost perfectly round. I was just curious about this building was here before. If you did the same sort of calculation on the existing building before it was actually refurbished, how would that look? Because we need these sort of benchmarks.
Yeah.
And secondly, I was just curious because it looked almost too perfect.
Yeah, it's for LKR Innovation House. It's a bit special case because this was not. It was a warehouse before, so it was not heated. It was not made for daylight and views, and so it would look completely different from what we saw here. But we could also make it for a new build. We have done that before.
Thank you very much to you. Our time is up. Thank you for the questions and thank you for attention. And we will get many more opportunities to show the full fantastic graphics. Give them a hand.